The Baker Heated League, page 7, by Patricia McKissick and her husband, Frederick McKissick. Porters developed a language and a history that grew out of their common experiences, and they shared their experiences from coast to coast, north and south, singing and telling stories to help pass the time while waiting for an assignment. And it took the edge off being away from home and their loved ones. Train stations provided quarters for porters called porterhouses, sitting around a Baker heater, a large pot-bellied stove. The first porters told tales and real-life stories that, in time, developed into communication network particular to themselves. For example, if something happened in New York on Friday, porters in every state would know about it on Sundays. Political news, a good joke, style, language, even a girl's phone number could be passed from New York to Chicago to Los Angeles or Minneapolis to St. Louis to New Orleans. This special brotherhood became known as the Baker Heater League. As porters died or retired, their stories became part of a railroad lore, and their legacy helped to reshape and mold new heroes and legends. Just as lumberjacks created their superhero, Paul Bunyan and cowboys sing about Wiley Pecos Bill, railroaders, and Casey Jones and John Henry. John Luther Jones, better known as Casey Jones, was an engineer on Cannonball number 382. On the evening of April 29, 1900, Casey and his black fireman, Sim Webb, prepared to take the Cannonball from Memphis to Canton. The scheduled engineer was out ill. The train left at 12:50 a.m., an hour and 30 minutes late. Casey was determined to make up for lost time. There were a series of mishaps and miscommunications. Casey's train crashed. Although the brave engineer could have jumped to safety, he stayed with the train and saved many lives at the cost of his own. Casey Jones became a railroad hero, and many songs were written about him. Fireman jumped, but Casey stayed home. He was a good engineer, but he's dead and gone. Legend tells us in another song that when John Henry was a little boy, he was sitting on his father's knee. He was looking down on a piece of steel and saying, "Still driving man I'll be. Lord, Lord, still driving man I'll be." The real John Henry, believed to be a newly freed slave from North Carolina, joined the West Virginia Steel driving team and hired to dug out the Big Bend Tunnel for the C&O Railroad circa 1870. Many stories tell the life and adventures of the 200-pound, 6-foot man who was strong and who could drive steel with a hammer in each hand. John Henry's death occurred after competing with the steam drill, winning, and then dying. The steam drill sat on the right-hand side, and John Henry was on the left. He said, "I'll beat that steam drill down or I'll hammer my fool self to death." Casey Jones and John Henry belonged to all railroaders, but Pullman porters had their very own hero in Daddy Joe. Daddy Joe was a real person, but like most legends, his exploits were greatly exaggerated. One story establishes him in legend, if not fact, that Daddy Joe was the first Pullman porter. He was said to have stood so tall and to have large hands so powerful that he could walk flat-footed on the aisle and let the upper berths down on each side. Whenever a storyteller wanted to make a good point about courtesy, honesty, or an outstanding job performance, he used a Daddy Joe story. And a tale about him usually began with, "The most terrific Pullman porter you ever made down the berth was Daddy Joe." Then the teller would tell a story like this one. Hostile Indians were said to attack a train at the water tank. The all-white passengers were terrified, but Daddy Joe, with no regard to the Pullman's rules or his own safety, climbed on the top of the train and spoke to the Indians in their own language. Afterwards, Daddy Joe threw a Pullman blanket down for each member of the attacking party and asked a blessing at the end. The Indians let the train pass safely. Whenever he was facing hurricanes, high water, fires, or robberies or Indians, Daddy Joe was always masterfully dealt with the situation. Legend had it that he even thwarted off one of Jesse James' attempts at robbery. Daddy Joe got so tips from the grateful passengers, he was said to be burdened down with gold and silver. The first porters who created Daddy Joe in their own image were proud of him. He represented the qualities they valued, unquestionably loyalty and dedication to the job. New railroad employees were always a source of a good laugh, too. The new brakeman story, or like it, was a porterhouse favorite. It began with a young college graduate who got a yearning to work on the railroad. So he traded his suit and tie for the rusty railroad blues. Right away, he was hired as a brakeman on the Knox-Lincoln line. On his first run, the engineer was having a hard time getting that freight up the steep hill. After getting the train over, the engineer called out, "I was afraid she stalled on the track and would roll backwards." The new brakeman proudly smiled and assured the engineer, "No chance of that happening," he said, beaming with pride. "Because before we started, I went back and I set the brakes." Amid thigh-slapping laughter, another tale began with, "Did you hear the story about the flag man?" Of course, they all heard the story 100 times, but each teller added or subtracted something until the tale was his own. That's how the tale stayed fresh and original.